Welcome to The Turning Point, a podcast for any and all of us who are interested in education in Sub-Saharan Africa. On this podcast, we'll be speaking with leaders, teachers and educators from all walks of life, but all of whom have a keen interest in the preparation of our next generations for an exciting future on the African continent. If you are interested in Africa taking its rightful place on the global education stage, or indeed simply interested in having a small window into this crucially important time in African education's history, join us on The Turning Point to hear what others have to say. Mthulisi Machakaile is a highly experienced school leader, having worked in both state and private education settings in several countries, including the UK and in some in Africa. He is the founding head of Sentinel Kabitaka School in Zambia and currently still works in that capacity. In addition to his current position, Mthulisi also chairs the Independent Schools Association of Zambia, also known as ISAZ, and advocates for increased recognition of the independent education sector and the important work that they do in the context of sub-Saharan African education. Mthulisi's main passion within education is the building of capacity for school leaders because he feels this is fundamental in driving positive change within a school. He joins us today to give us his perspective on the decolonising of schools in Africa.
Hi Chuck, welcome to the Turning Point, the podcast where we discuss really interesting developments in African education. And of course, today with you, we're talking about what it really means to have a decolonising agenda. And so I wondered, just by way of starting, what are your thoughts on the idea of education systems being positioned so that they service the needs of their countries? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks for having me, Dave, and thanks for putting me on this podcast series. The ideal situation is for a country to prepare its using obviously its education system, prepare its youth to service the needs of the country. Of course, that's a fair assessment, but I would say, and an understandable one, but I don't think in any way, shape or form that really encompasses all there is to education systems. There's so much more to education than labor force. And there are caveats, obviously, to the way anyone would view what I've just said about servicing the needs of the country. So, for example, if we're saying there's so much more to education, it's not only about the academics. We will talk about some fairly obvious examples. Most sports personalities would have emerged, for example, through school programs. Most musicians would have emerged from school music programs. Same would apply to actors, etc. And we really couldn't possibly call those a labor force in quite the way most people would mean it. I mean, in fact, when I think of labor force, I almost get the impression of a communist state. That we're pushing you through this system in order to come out on the other side as good citizens who will obey the laws of this country and will, serve the country for whatever needs there are in that particular country. We're a global village now, and for a country to think that it's producing students or it's producing it's bringing children through its education system or students through its education system solely to serve that country, I don't think works at all. Look at you and I. You were born in South Africa. You've worked for a long time in other parts of Africa, and you're currently living in the UK. I was born in Zimbabwe. Lived and worked in South Africa, the UK, Nigeria, a very short time in Saudi, and here I am in Zambia for the last 10 years. I certainly wasn't produced by my country to serve my country. So we need to bear in mind now that we're a global village, and that the mobility of labor has never been as prominent an issue as it is now. So anyone who's coming through that system, through any educational system, could very easily end up elsewhere. Education systems as well, I'm afraid, can be abused. I speak as one who certainly feels that there was a lot of indoctrination in my education, which had me thinking in a certain way. I'll give you the example of I went to a Catholic school for quite a bit of my time, and whilst my views on religion and Christianity in particular have changed, they change with almost a fear at the back of my mind that at any moment I could be struck down, or whatever the case might be. I think anyone's fear of the dark is probably got to do with one kind of religious jinn or other, who's out there, hiding behind a tree or behind the curtains or under the bed. So education systems can actually be used for indoctrination, and that there can be a danger in that. So if we go back to what the purpose of education is, it's manifold. The reasons are myriad. We need to prepare our children for the world out there. In whatever way that world manifests itself, we just have to prepare our children for it, is, I think, the best way of putting it. The education system can never, in any country, I don't care where, can never meet the needs of every single individual who's going through it. It can try, and some systems will get plaudits for what they do. Switzerland comes to mind, and the way they preparing students for the work environment, the apprenticeship programs they have running, not only within mechanical or boiler making or that kind of thing, or just preparing students for the workforce, is something which Switzerland is viewed as a beacon for that. But at the end of it all, I think if we can just bear in mind that we're preparing ourselves, our children rather, for a future which we don't know. We can guess at what it is. And the most we can do, or the least we can do, I'm not really sure which, is just to prepare them with that understanding that the future is going to change. I remember when there was talk of preparing children for, or preparing the current generation for the future, and a lot of talk was about IT, etc. We just couldn't get our heads around it. Those who got their hands around it, I think, have done quite well for themselves.
Sure.
But yeah, so I know now that your computer courses are a dime a dozen, IT courses are a dime a dozen. They're everywhere. So sometimes we're reacting, whereas in fact we shouldn't be reacting. So I think the role and the purpose of an education system is prepare that generation which is being educated not to react, or rather to be proactive about that as much as possible. I think I'll leave it there. I could go on.
Yeah, it's an extremely interesting topic, but it does make you think about sort of decolonizing as a concept, and the idea that systems in Africa and many parts of the world were built up around a kind of a global north ideal, or the colonizing countries ideal of what of how we educate children.
That's right.
So how do you think that how do we decolonize? Like, how do you think we decolonize a school? What is it that we should be focusing on that we can actually, okay, I'll give you an example. There's quite a lot of talk at the moment about how children, how countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are ending up with a high unemployment rate once children leave school, because the way that they've been through an education system has not prepared them effectively for what their futures are. But I'm trying to understand how that works, because we're in a global village, like you said. But then does the decolonizing mean that we're not appealing to the way that they need to learn, or what are your thoughts?
You're absolutely right about the fact that the way we're doing things right now, I can only say is probably, because I don't have a crystal ball, is probably not quite what they need. And it's very clear from the economic situations of many African countries, certainly the ones I've been to anyway, that there's simple things like there's a lack of self-sufficiency, which speaks to the fact that we're still relying quite heavily on especially Western countries, and these days we can also speak about the East, for far too much of what I don't understand why we wouldn't be able to prepare ourselves for that. We've moved from being from your traditional type of colonialism, I'm afraid, to neo-colonialism, because what we were moving away from or running away from, whilst it's still there, is only being replaced, when we do replace it, by a new form of colonialism. The way we need to prepare our children for that and to decolonize our schools and our educational systems is to look inwards at what we actually need first and foremost. And not really be thinking in terms of far too often, sorry, I've cut my thought off there, but far too often we're finding ourselves preparing our children for non-existent jobs and for non-existent occupations. And those are really a mirror of what happens in the West. My experience of education is very heavily influenced by the United Kingdom, by Great Britain, by the British Empire. And that is all my parents wanted me to do. They were looking towards, okay, fine, we're looking at getting a lawyer, a barrister, or a solicitor, or an engineer out of this guy. And nobody was really thinking, what does this country need? I know many guys who've been to school in South Africa, the United Kingdom, and America, who've got their law degrees, who've got their engineering degrees. At the very best, they have diversified and been successful in other things. At the worst, they're unemployed and beginning to think what a waste of time my education was. And that's because the view was, we're preparing you, which we have always seen reflected by those who colonized us in the past. Unfortunately, as I've already said, colonialism is not dead. It's as alive and well and living in Africa.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why the conversation about decolonizing schools is becoming so important, because, as you rightly pointed out, decolonizing schools is becoming such an important feature. Because, as you rightly pointed out, a lot of people are looking to the sort of global north and the job market as it exists there, and failing to perhaps look at what's needed closer to home.
That's right.
So if we had to take that thought and then extend it into what things might look like in the future, what's your take on that? I'm asking for your crystal ball here.
My crystal ball is out, and I've started applying some policies within my own context, which I'm hoping will change the way my current cohort of students, and I've been here for almost 10 years now, and I'm only doing this now, unfortunately. So I'm trying my best to to position my students, first of all, to be entrepreneurial. Second of all, to maybe not relying so much on exporting raw materials, but rather thinking in terms of how can we use what we have here, rather than sending it out and having it sold back to us as complete products. Why don't we have an entire chain which eventually leads to the finished product, and those products should leave from here? So that's the entrepreneurial part. And then most importantly for me, and it has been, I think the Ukraine situation actually bears witness to this, is we are looking down our noses at the most important occupation for man, for humankind. That's agriculture. You've eaten. Whatever you've eaten today has come from a farm. Invariably, there's no way it's come from anywhere else. It has had to come from some kind of agricultural system. So my crystal ball sees a situation where Africa begins to take advantage of its own resources, where Africa looks to itself to moving things, moving products from getting them out of the ground, whether we're talking about fruit or crops or whatever the case might be, all the way through until they're actually being exported. And of course, ensuring that we are looking after ourselves as well. Or indeed, if we're talking about the minerals coming out of the ground, there's absolutely nothing wrong with us looking to that. But that can't be something which will just materialize. It has to start at grassroots, and it has to do with the revision of the education systems we have at the moment. We're pushing as much as possible to sell the raw materials out to whoever is willing to pay a good price for them in whatever country, whether it's the Far East or the global North. And we are forgetting that actually we can process these things and they can go out there. So we need to look to ourselves. I was told on one or two occasions of schools in other parts of the country which had very good agricultural programs, for example, go and have a look at what's happening there. And I got there. Obviously, the person who was talking about it or who had told me about it had been there maybe 10 years before. Because what I then saw when I went to that place was that, as we always do, we're looking down our noses at the very future of the continent, which is agriculture. So, for example, until 2 years ago, I didn't have agricultural science as an IGCSE option. We've brought it in. When we brought boarding online here at my school, we were buying all our products in. And we're up in the northwest of Zambia, but I kid you not, our potatoes are from South Africa. Our onions are from South Africa. Sugar, etc., is from South Africa. Even the squash, etc., is from South Africa. If stuff isn't from South Africa, for example, the fish, I was shocked to learn that we don't produce enough fish in this country to feed our own population. We have to import them from Thailand and China, which became a very important issue for my wife. So I'm going back to this. What my crystal ball is going to force through the fact that we need, as much as possible, to be pushing for those agricultural sciences and to be pushing that supply chain to actually for goods to leave our country processed. It's not going to be easy, but that's the only way we're going to survive. I can't believe that one country, just one country being invaded has affected oil, petrol, diesel, and wheat right across the globe. And look at where we sit. We're right at the bottom, but we are affected by what's going on up there. We need to be self-sufficient.
And many people would say, of course, that flying food halfway across the world is really not going to be sustainable in the long term anyway.
It's not sustainable, absolutely. or shipping in, whichever
Yeah.
the case may be. Yeah.
And I love the fact that you raised the entrepreneurial side as well, because it is my experience that African people are highly entrepreneurial. I mean, every one of my staff members, every one of my Malawian staff members that when I was head of a school in Malawi, had a side hustle. You know, it was just the thing that people did. Even if it was a small side hustle that came and went or whatever, there was always that sense of entrepreneurship going on. And
Agreed.
And it's those skills that really are bringing the kind of the focus back to, like you said, you know, the production and the whole creation of these streams of production in the host country, rather than shipping out. And of course, one of the biggest things that we're shipping out at the moment, under you know, kind of colonial, the old colonial education system, is our human capital.
But absolutely.
You know, because
that's why you're there.
That's the global north they're going to go. You know?
Yeah, that's right. And there's, I think, this thinking, and that really needs to stop. That the epitome of success is if you're, you know, sitting in a dreary flat in the global north, because most of them, I mean, the weather where you are can be amazing. And then spending 6 months of the year not seeing the sun and that kind of thing. That's the epitome of success. And of course, what you get is somebody going home for 2 weeks in August and, you know, giving this impression that, you know, it's a great and glorious world out there. And that's the kind of life we all want for ourselves. We know full well that that's not exactly it. There is so much we can do within our own countries. If we could stop for a moment and you know, decolonize our minds in terms of, you know, we need to be out there. I mentioned that it's a global village. I didn't say, and I don't believe that we should be preparing our current generation of students to be leaving Africa to go and sell their services to the highest bidder in the global north. In fact, far from it. I would rather that brain drain didn't happen at all, and those brains were used right here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in October, at the beginning of October, as you will be well aware, we have the first leading education change, the LEC conference, which is happening in Nairobi.
Yes.
And you're one of the keynote speakers at that. So can you give us a very, very quick snapshot of how your kind of story is going to be woven into what you're talking about at the conference?
I've been fortunate enough to work in the global north, a little bit of time in the Middle East and West Africa and Central Africa, as well as Southern Africa. And I think what I bring to the table eventually is my experience of all these different contexts. And I think the most important thing for me, the most important message for me to my fellow heads at that conference is, guess what? You're not alone. All the challenges you're facing right now are the challenges I've faced, whether I've been in West Africa, in Central Africa, in, you know, the United Kingdom, wherever I've worked. The same challenges you're facing, the same issues you're facing, to one extent or another, are exactly the same. So if I share those experiences and also share how I've dealt with some of those experiences, then I believe, you know, that feeling of isolation, which any leader in whatever organization they're in, may well be dispelled a little bit. It's lonely at the top. It really is. And sometimes you do not get that opportunity to bounce off anyone else around you, because they don't really understand what you're going through. But if you're sitting across the table from a fellow head in whatever context they've come from, then you're showing them that, look, You might feel that, the grass is greener on this side, but guess what? You and I are in exactly the same boat. And I think that message really needs to be clear. In addition to that, I would like to share the importance of an understanding of culture as it relates to leadership, especially school leadership. There is no school which is the same culturally. You cross a border, even countries just next door to each other, and it's like you're walking into a totally different environment. Although people may speak the same language. I've seen that when I cross between Bite Bridge and Messina, the same language is spoken, but you look around and you realize that this is a totally different way of life, whichever direction you're moving in. And that contextual understanding, especially of the social cultural influences, is key to how we run our schools, is key to how we run our educational systems. My doctoral thesis actually is about this, and it picks up on quite a few challenges which people face, and some things, influences, which people aren't even aware have an impact on the way they enact their leadership. I would like to share a little bit of that with the conference in October.
It's going to be fascinating. I'm so looking forward to that, and so looking forward to hearing you speak. And I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of people who would share that enthusiasm. One final question: if you had a single line message to give out to all the schools in Africa, what would that message be?
Okay, so this sentence is actually a positive and a negative, because it can be done both ways. Okay, I'm going to say just my one-liner. It says, you can do it with schools and teachers. And then it can also say, you can't do it without schools and teachers. There is no way you can possibly, look, everyone has to come through us at some point.
Such a crucial role, such a crucial, pivotal role that I think schools will play in the future of Africa, actually.
Absolutely.
And I think particularly at the moment, particularly after the pandemic, has opened our eyes to the use of technology and,
that's right,
in education, just given us opportunities, actually, in many ways.
That's right.
So I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that line. Thank you for that.
Most welcome.
That does bring to an end our podcast. Chuck, thanks very much for joining me. And it's been fascinating to hear you talk about your views of decolonizing education in Africa and the importance of education in general in Africa at this point. And we're thoroughly looking forward to seeing you in October in Nairobi. Thanks again.